Privyet, Druzy. My name is Wes O'Donnell, veteran of the Army Infantry and the Air Force. And when people ask me which branch was better, I have to tell them the Air Force. That was my experience. Tell me why I'm wrong in the comments. Today we're talking about how Ukraine's Bradley infantry fighting vehicles have reached mythic status among the troops. But first, I will be your comrade, your Tovarish for life, if you push that subscribe button. It allows me to keep making AI-free military analysis. And trust me, you don't want the machines to take over. We've all seen that future, and it does not look good. So let's jump in. Ukraine's battlefield wins with US Bradleys show the power of adequate military aid. And we can finally put to bed these imaginary red lines and fears about escalation and get Ukraine what they need. Did I ever tell you the story of how a Bradley ran me over in the Army? It was part of a training exercise in the infantry to teach us to keep calm and still perform our jobs under extreme conditions. Usually, the track has a much smaller M113, the Army's Vietnam-era battle taxi. But on this day, it was broken down, and they had a Bradley stand in. We were to let the Bradley roll over us, between the wide tracks, obviously, and then pop up and shoot it in the rear with an AT-4 anti-tank rocket. Since then, I've had a healthy respect for the Bradley, even though I was 11 Bravo, light infantry, and never got the privilege to ride in one. To date, the US has delivered over 300 Bradley fighting vehicles to Ukraine, far more than other armored combat vehicles like the Abrams, of which only 31 have been sent. This larger supply has allowed Ukraine to use the Bradleys much more effectively than they could with tanks. The key to military success often lies in having enough of a weapon to use it strategically. With a sizable inventory, armies can take risks, push for breakthroughs, and absorb losses without suffering significant tactical or PR blows. In other words, drip-feeding Ukraine a few Abrams or a few F-16s just creates scarcity and limits how Ukraine can use these vehicles. With so few, Ukraine military planners may feel a need to protect them, holding them back from engaging Russian troops where they're needed. For Ukraine, having so many Bradleys in play means they can afford to lose a few and still press on. It's not always about having the most advanced military equipment. Quantity actually matters too. We're learning now that striking the right balance between cutting-edge technology and sheer numbers is essential, especially against the Russian military where numbers matter. So let's take a fresh look at the Bradley and how Ukraine is maximizing its impact on the battlefield. The M2A2 Bradley, often mistaken for a tank, is the middle child between the Big Daddy Abrams main battle tank and the lightly armored M113 battle taxi. The Bradley is tracked and has a 25mm gun mounted on a rotating turret atop the vehicle's hull, a 7.62mm machine gun mounted on the turret, and launchers for the BGM-71 TOW missile. In fact, thanks to the TOW launchers, the Bradley killed more Iraqi tanks during the First Gulf War than its big brother, the Abrams. But the main distinction between the Bradley and a main battle tank is the mission. In its main configuration, Bradleys can carry a crew of 3, plus 6 mounted infantrymen. These infantry are classified as 11 Mike, or mechanized infantry. These lucky Mikes get to ride into battle in the relative discomfort in the back of a Bradley, cramped, confined spaces, the smell of diesel fumes and unwashed soldiers, and uncushioned seats. So uncivilized.
So uncivilized.
Personally, I'd prefer to walk or air assault, actually. Once at their destination, they will dismount the Bradley out of the rear doors to close with and destroy the enemy. Now, this is not a new idea. From about the 17th century, dragoons were originally a class of mounted infantry who used horses for mobility, but dismounted to fight on foot. Now, the Bradley was designed to keep up with the Abrams and has a top speed of 56 kilometers per hour. It's about 35 miles per hour. Power is supplied to the tracks via a Cummins VTA 9031 diesel that puts out roughly 600 horsepower. Now, this is a big advantage for the Ukrainians over the Abrams. The Abrams tank has a unique turbine engine that requires significantly more maintenance than the trusty Cummins diesel found on the Bradleys. When I first learned that Ukraine was receiving Bradleys in January of 2023, I suggested that Ukraine might consider using them as roving hunter-killer teams and kill some Russian armor. The Bradley could not only use its tow launcher and 25mm Bushmaster, but could load up the back with some soldiers with javelins or other anti-tank weaponry and leverage the Bradley as a roving tank killer task force. Now, years later, that's exactly what's happened. The AFU has wisely worked out the weaknesses in Russian armor, one of which is the delicate exterior optics that Russian tank crews rely on to drive and shoot. In January of this year, 2 Ukrainian Bradleys happened upon a Russian T-90M main battle tank and disabled it. That's right, a 40-year-old Bradley from storage that the US donated to Ukraine took out Russia's most advanced piece of heavy armor. In this engagement, the T-90 missed its first shot against the Bradley, while the Bradley crew started unleashing a barrage from its 25mm chain gun, firing numerous rounds as it accelerated down the road, distancing itself from the tank. The Bradley's 25mm Bushmaster chain gun is capable of firing up to 200 rounds per minute at its highest cyclic rate, which is the setting most often employed. These types include the M919 APADS armor-piercing discarding sabot tracer rounds made of depleted uranium, and the M792 high-explosive incendiary tracer rounds. The T-90 was ultimately disabled by the Bradley. My fellow infantryman Chris Cappy over at Task and Purpose did a solid breakdown of this engagement. Do yourself a favor and go watch that when you're done here. Link in the description. But what likely happened is the Bradley disabled the T-90's optics. Both the commander and the gunner on the T-90 tank rely on separate optical devices. Damaging these optics could render the crew virtually blind and significantly impair their combat capabilities. While the hull and the main turret are heavily armored on the T-90, the sights are only somewhat protected and would be ineffective after only a couple of well-placed 25mm hits. Once described as the best tank in the world by Vladimir Putin, as of this video, Russia has lost 100 T-90s in Ukraine. But remember, it's not necessarily that the Bradley is some legendary, indestructible APC. It's simply that Ukraine has enough of them to use them effectively and strategically. 2 or 3 Bradleys against a piece of heavy Russian armor is usually going to favor the Bradleys. And this goes back to the old saying that quantity is a quality all its own. So while Ukraine is strategic about its Bradley deployment, it also helps that Russia isn't very thoughtful regarding where it throws its tanks. If there were ever a case to be made for providing Ukraine with adequate military aid, one need only look at the Bradley's success in Ukraine. That's it. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Slava Ukraini.